They laughed because they thought humiliation was power. They went silent when they learned power had been watching the whole time. The first sound anyone remembered was the buzz of the clippers. It cut through the holding room like a hornet trapped in glass, sharp and steady beneath the cold fluorescent lights. Officer Derek Vaughan held the device in one hand with the lazy confidence of a man who had never been told no. Around him, 2 other officers leaned against the metal desk, grinning into paper cups of stale coffee as if this were entertainment scheduled between shifts. In the center chair sat Naomi Carter, wrists resting calmly in front of her, posture straight, eyes level. A black woman in a gray business suit, now wrinkled from a long night, with rain still drying at the hem of her coat. She had said almost nothing since they brought her in. That silence irritated Derek more than any protest could have. Still not talking, he asked, circling behind her. Funny. People usually have a lot to say when the ride downtown starts. One of the officers chuckled. Another lifted his phone halfway, then lowered it when Derek glanced over. Naomi did not turn around. She watched the reflection in the dark window across from her. Beyond the glass, dawn had not yet broken. The city was still somewhere between midnight mistakes and morning consequences. You know what your problem is, Derek said. You walk in like you belong wherever you go. He clicked the clippers on again. The sound filled the room. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes to meet his reflection. Calm. Unblinking. The kind of calm that unsettles people who mistake noise for strength. Write down my name carefully, she said. Her voice was low, clear, and controlled. It landed heavier than shouting ever could. Derek smirked. Already did. No, Naomi replied. You wrote the wrong one. That drew a few confused looks, then another round of laughter. Derek stepped closer, eager to win back the room. Lady, at 2:30 in the morning, nobody important is sitting in a holding chair. Naomi's expression never changed. That, she said, depends on what time court begins. For a second, even the buzzing clippers seemed quieter. Then Derek barked a laugh so loud it gave everyone permission to join him. Court, he said. You hear that? She thinks she's headed to court. He leaned toward the others. Maybe she wants front row seats. Naomi said nothing more. She simply glanced at the wall clock. 2:37 a.m. Her eye stayed there long enough for the nearest officer to notice. What are you looking at? He asked. The distance, she said. Between confidence and regret. The room went still for half a heartbeat before Derek forced another grin. He moved behind her chair, lifted a section of hair, and let it fall. You really think anybody's coming for you? Naomi looked straight ahead. No, she answered. I think they're already waiting. Outside the room, footsteps passed in the hallway. Phones rang. Doors opened and shut. Somewhere beyond these walls, paperwork moved, schedules printed, names appeared on dockets, and a courtroom prepared for the morning session. Inside, the officers saw only a woman they believed they had cornered. They did not see the sealed files already on a clerk's desk. They did not see the security requests that had been logged after midnight. They did not see the black robe hanging in chambers 3 floors above them. Derek switched off the clippers and tossed them on the desk. You know what I like most, he said. The attitude disappears right before sunrise. Naomi finally turned her head, just enough to look at him directly. There was no anger in her face. No fear. Only certainty. Then don't blink, she said. Sunrise is close. 8 hours earlier, the city had still been pretending to sleep. Richmond wore that strange pre-dawn silence where traffic lights changed for no one and office towers glowed like they were keeping secrets. Naomi Carter guided her silver sedan through streets slick from a light spring rain, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near a leather folder on the passenger seat. Inside that folder were motions, affidavits, internal reports, and names that had survived too long in darkness. She had reviewed every page before leaving home. She knew which officers lied. She knew which supervisors signed what they never read. She knew which complaints had vanished after midnight. And she knew that by 9:05 that morning, excuses would start collapsing under oath. The dashboard clock read 1:58 a.m. She had left earlier than necessary because judges who expected resistance learned to arrive before it. Her courthouse chambers were quiet at that hour, the only place in the city where she could think before lawyers filled the halls with strategy and fear. She turned onto Madison Avenue, passing shuttered storefronts and empty bus stops, when red and blue lights suddenly spilled across her rearview mirror. The flash painted the inside of her car in warning colors. Naomi glanced at the speedometer. 28 in a 30 zone. Turn signal used. Registration current. Nothing to explain. She exhaled once and pulled to the curb. Officer Derek Vaughan stepped from the patrol cruiser with the swagger of a man greeting a stage already set for him. Rain dotted his shoulders. He adjusted his duty belt, then approached slowly, shining a flashlight across the windows though the street lamps were bright enough to make it unnecessary. Naomi lowered the window halfway. "Good morning, officer." Derek did not return the courtesy. His eyes moved over the tailored coat, the dashboard, the folder on the seat, then back to her face with visible suspicion. "License and registration." Naomi handed them over without comment. He studied the card longer than needed. "Naomi Carter," he read. "Where are you headed at 2 in the morning dressed like that?" "To work." He looked at the courthouse parking decal on her windshield and smiled as if he had found something amusing. "That right?" "That is right." Another cruiser rolled up behind his. Officer Mason Reed remained inside, watching through the windshield. Derek leaned closer to the window. "Step out of the vehicle." "Am I being cited?" Naomi asked. "Step out of the vehicle." The tone was not about law. It was about performance. Naomi gathered her folder first. Derek placed a hand on the roof of the car. "Leave that. Those are court materials." "Not anymore." She paused, then set the folder back down. Rain tapped against the hood. Somewhere a train. Horns sounded in the distance. Naomi stepped onto the wet pavement in low heels, straightened her coat, and looked directly at Derek. "Tell me the reason for the stop." He glanced toward Mason's cruiser, aware he had an audience. "Suspicious driving." "That is not a traffic violation." "Tonight it is." Mason laughed from inside the second car. Naomi recognized the pattern immediately. The invented concern. The fishing expedition. The confidence that no one would challenge them before sunrise. Derek circled once around the sedan, peering through windows he had already seen through. "What is in the folder?" "Documents for court." "Open the trunk." "Do you have a warrant?" His jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to precise questions asked in a calm voice. "You people always think every rule protects you," he said. Naomi let the words hang in the damp air. "Rules protect everyone," she answered. "That is their purpose." He stepped closer. "Not when I say otherwise." For the first time, Naomi's expression hardened. Not with anger, but disappointment so sharp it almost sounded like pity. She looked past him toward the dark silhouette of the courthouse dome rising 6 blocks away. "Officer Vaughan," she said quietly, reading the nameplate on his chest, "you should be very careful with tonight." He grinned. "Why is that?" Naomi met his eyes. "Because morning keeps records." Derek Vaughan had expected fear by now. He had expected trembling hands, raised voices, maybe tears. He understood those reactions. They fit neatly into the story he liked to tell himself about control. What unsettled him was composure. Naomi Carter stood beside her sedan in the thin rain as if she were waiting for a valet instead of standing under flashing patrol lights. Her shoulders remained square. Her breathing never changed. Even the silence around her seemed disciplined. Mason Reed finally stepped out of the second cruiser, tugging his jacket closed against the cold. He was younger than Derek, broad-faced and eager in the way some men become when cruelty looks like acceptance. "What have we got?" Mason asked. Derek held up Naomi's license between two fingers. "Possible obstruction. Evasive. Answers. Suspicious movement." Naomi turned her head slightly. "I answered every question asked." Mason shrugged. "That is your opinion." He walked to the passenger side and peered through the window at the leather folder on the seat. "Looks expensive." Derek smirked. "Maybe she can explain it downtown." Naomi looked from one officer to the other, measuring them the way experienced people measure weather. "You still have time to correct this," she said. Mason laughed softly. "Correct what?" "The part where you confuse authority with impulse." Derek opened the car door, reached in, and removed the folder. He flipped through the papers without reading them, then frowned at the legal seals and signatures. "You carry all this around to impress people?" Naomi's eyes sharpened for the first time. "Those are sealed court materials." "Not anymore," he said, tucking the folder under his arm. He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Here is how tonight works. We ask. You answer. We decide if you go home." "No," Naomi replied. "That is how tonight appears to work." The rain grew steadier, beading on the roof of the cruisers and darkening the curbside pavement. Across the street, a bakery employee unlocked a side door and glanced over before quickly looking away. People often recognized injustice in an instant. They simply did not always recognize what to do with it. Derek noticed the witness and puffed himself taller. "Turn around." Naomi did not move. "State the charge first." "Failure to comply." "With what lawful order?" Mason stepped forward. "You sure ask a lot of questions for someone in trouble." Naomi gave him a level stare. "Questions are how trouble gets named." That line landed harder than either officer expected. Derek's jaw tightened. Men like him depended on confusion. Precision felt like rebellion. He reached for her wrist. Naomi did not pull away. She simply looked at the courthouse dome again, barely visible through the mist. "What time is it?" she asked. Mason checked his watch automatically. 2:12. Derek snapped, "Why does that matter?" Naomi answered without looking at him. "Because in 6 hours, many people in this city will be required to tell the truth." Mason chuckled, though less confidently than before. "Lady, nobody knows who you are." Naomi finally faced them both. That has always been the favorite mistake of small men. The words hung there, impossible to laugh off. Derek responded the only way insecure power often responds. He gestured toward the cruiser. "She is coming in." Naomi nodded once, almost sympathetically. "Then bring the folder," she said. "You are going to need it." Mason opened the rear door. Derek guided her toward the car with theatrical confidence, but the rhythm had shifted. He felt it even if he could not name it. Naomi entered the back seat with the calm of someone taking her assigned place in a larger plan. As the door closed, she looked through the glass at Derek and said one final sentence that followed him all the way to the driver's seat. "When men play games with the law," she said, "the law eventually asks to play back." The ride to the precinct lasted 11 minutes, though it felt longer because silence can stretch time when arrogance fills the front seat. Rain streaked the windows in thin silver lines, blurring storefront signs and traffic lights into soft color. Derek Vaughan drove with one wrist draped over the wheel, glancing at the rearview mirror more often than the road. Mason Reed sat in the passenger seat, turning Naomi's leather folder over in his lap like a prize he did not understand. Neither officer spoke for the first few blocks. They expected the woman in the back seat to break that silence for them. Naomi Carter did not. She sat upright, hands folded, eyes moving from street corners to church steeples to the courthouse dome fading behind them. She looked less like a detainee than a traveler memorizing landmarks before dawn. Mason finally opened the folder and whistled softly. Look at all this. Motions, signatures, sealed stamps. He flipped a page upside down, then another. What do you even do? Naomi answered immediately. I read carefully. Derek smirked. Cute. Mason found a business card tucked inside and held it toward the dashboard light. Chief Clerk's Office, he read. You know courthouse people. Many of them, Naomi said. They begin work early. Derek gave a dry laugh. Then maybe one of them can pick you up after booking. The patrol car turned into the precinct lot, where sodium lights cast the building in tired yellow. The station was one of those aging brick structures that seemed permanently awake, no matter the hour. Inside, phones rang, printers hummed, and the smell of burnt coffee lingered like old disappointment. Derek stepped out first and opened the rear door with theatrical patience. Welcome in. Naomi exited carefully, smoothing her coat despite the rain. She looked up at the building, then at the flag above it snapping in the wind. Still time, she said. Derek frowned. For what? For one honest decision. He ignored her and led the way inside. At the booking desk sat Sergeant Cole Turner, a broad man with tired eyes who had learned to survive by confusing routine with wisdom. He glanced at Naomi, then at Derek. What is this? Derek set the folder on the counter. Suspicious behavior. Failure to comply. Possible interference. Cole looked at Naomi's clothes, posture, and expression, then at the folder. At 2 a.m. Derek's smile tightened. That is when suspicious people travel. Cole grunted, unwilling to challenge a story he did not want to investigate. Name, he asked. Naomi Carter, she replied. Cole typed slowly. His fingers paused for a fraction of a second, as if the name brushed against a memory not fully awake. Then he continued. Occupation. Naomi met his eyes. Public service. Derek laughed loud enough for 2 nearby officers to turn around. Put unemployed if she keeps being vague. Naomi did not look at him. Truth does not become vague because you dislike hearing it. The younger officers exchanged glances. Some smiled. Some looked away. In institutions built on hierarchy, discomfort often hides behind paperwork. Cole slid a form across the desk. Personal items. Naomi removed a watch, a ring, and a small silver pen. Derek picked up the pen and clicked it twice. Fancy. Gift from a retiring judge, Naomi said. Cole's fingers stopped again above the keyboard. Which judge? Naomi answered calmly. Several of them. The room shifted by a degree. No one could measure. Derek sensed it and pushed harder. Put her in holding. Cole hesitated. We still need probable cause written clean. Then write cleaner, Derek snapped. Naomi watched the exchange with almost clinical interest. Sergeant Turner, she said softly, reading the nameplate on his chest, when this night is reviewed, remember there was a moment you could still choose accuracy. Cole looked at her longer this time. Somewhere upstairs, a wall clock chimed 3 times. Phones kept ringing. Printers kept spitting paper. But for one brief second, the whole station felt like it was listening. Holding room B was colder than it needed to be, the kind of institutional cold designed less for comfort than for control. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A metal bench lined one wall. A security camera blinked red in the corner, then suddenly went dark. Naomi Carter noticed that detail before anyone else entered. She also noticed the clock above the door reading 3:18 a.m. Time moved differently in rooms built to make people feel forgotten. Derek Vaughan stepped inside carrying a paper cup of coffee and the restless energy of a man who still needed applause. Mason Reed followed with a cheap pair of clippers in one hand and Naomi's leather folder in the other. Comfortable? Derek asked. Naomi remained seated, hands folded neatly in her lap. No room built on misconduct ever is, she said. Mason laughed and placed the folder on the table. You know, most people beg by now. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Most people have not met consequences enough times to recognize their footsteps. Derek set down the coffee and glanced up at the camera. Looks like privacy hour. He seemed pleased with himself. The statement told Naomi more than any confession could have. Men who announce impunity usually believe it too deeply to hide it. He pulled a chair around and sat backward in it, arms folded across the top. Here is what happens next, he said. You stop acting important. You answer questions straight. Maybe we forget the charges. What charges? Naomi asked. The one still being invented. Mason let out a sharp laugh. Derek's smile faded. You think you are smarter than everybody in this building? No, Naomi replied. Only more patient. That answer irritated him more than anger would have. He stood and paced once across the room. I have seen your type before. Naomi's eyes never left him. Confident women. Derek ignored the line. People who think the system bends for them. The system bends, Naomi said quietly, when weak people lean on it. For a moment no one spoke. Outside the room, footsteps passed, a phone rang twice, then stopped. The ordinary sounds of the station continued while something less ordinary gathered inside. Mason set the clippers on the table with a small metallic click. Maybe she needs an attitude adjustment. Derek looked at the device, then back at Naomi. He wanted reaction. Fear. Pleading. Anything that would let him feel larger. Naomi gave him none. Instead she looked at Mason. Officer Reed, she said, reading his nameplate earlier from memory, do you always borrow another man's courage? Mason's grin slipped. Derek quickly switched the clippers on. The buzz filled the room again. Still brave, he said. Naomi glanced at the clock. 3:22 a.m. Still temporary, she answered. He stepped behind her chair. A lock of hair slipped forward near her shoulder. Derek waited for a flinch that never came. Naomi sat as still as carved stone. Do you know what silence means? She asked. It means nobody is coming, Derek said. No, Naomi replied. It means people are listening. Mason rolled his eyes, but his fingers tightened around the folder. Even he felt something changing, though he would not name it. Derek lowered the clippers closer, then stopped when a knock sounded at the door. Sergeant Cole Turner opened it halfway. Need the report completed, he said. Derek snapped back. 5 minutes. Cole's eyes moved to the dark camera, then to Naomi, then to the clippers. He said nothing and closed the door. Some silences are cowardice. Others are warnings too late. Derek turned the clippers off and leaned close enough for Naomi to hear him clearly. You are not in charge here. Naomi finally looked up at him, calm as sunrise. That sentence, she said, expires at 9 o'clock. At 8:14 a.m., the courthouse no longer looked like stone and columns. It looked like gravity. People moved toward it in pressed suits, polished shoes, uniforms, and worry. Reporters gathered near the front steps after hearing that a long-delayed misconduct hearing involving several city officers would begin that morning. Attorneys checked notes while pretending not to be nervous. Clerks carried folders like they were carrying weather forecasts. Inside courtroom 3, the air held that familiar mix of old wood, paper, and expectation. Every seat in the gallery filled early. Cases involving police conduct always drew two kinds of crowds, those hoping for justice and those certain it would never arrive. Officer Derek Vaughan entered through the side door with Mason Reed and Sergeant Cole Turner close behind. Their uniforms were pressed, their expressions rehearsed. Derek carried himself with the same swagger he wore at 2 in the morning, but it sat differently in daylight. Confidence built in dark rooms often weakens under public lights. Big show today, Mason muttered, scanning the room. Probably nothing. Cole adjusted his tie and said nothing. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dead camera light in holding room B. Derek leaned back in the defense chair and crossed one ankle over a knee. "This is paperwork theater," he said. "Internal Affairs wants headlines. Judge will scold everybody, then lunch by noon." Across the aisle, Assistant District Attorney Rachel Brooks organized exhibits with calm efficiency. She wore navy blue, moved quickly, and did not waste glances. Derek noticed her and smirked. "They sent Brooks. Must be serious." Cole finally spoke. "It is serious." Derek looked at him. "You suddenly grow a conscience." Cole stared straight ahead. "I suddenly remembered procedure." In the gallery, whispers moved row to row when a clerk placed an extra evidence monitor near the witness stand. Then another whisper followed when two state investigators entered carrying sealed boxes. Mason shifted in his seat. "What is all that?" Derek shrugged. "Drama." Yet even he noticed the room was not behaving normally. Bailiffs stood straighter. Court staff spoke softer. The usual casual chatter before hearings had been replaced by a tense hush, as if everyone had been told something important without being told what. Rachel Brooks approached the prosecution table and placed a single folder in front of her. Derek recognized the leather immediately. Naomi's folder. His jaw tightened before he could stop it. "Where did she get that?" he asked under his breath. Cole turned slowly. "That is the wrong question." "Then what is the right one?" Derek snapped. Cole's eyes were tired now, stripped of excuses. "How did she never lose it?" The courtroom doors opened again. More observers entered than seats allowed. Some stood along the back wall. A retired judge took a place in the front row. Two local attorneys whispered urgently when they saw the case assignment sheet posted outside. Mason leaned closer. "Something is off." Derek forced a laugh. "You two scared easy." But his hand had already begun tapping the armrest. At 8:28, Bailiff James Holt stepped to the center aisle. He was a careful man known for never showing emotion. Today he looked almost solemn. "All devices silent," he announced. "Court begins in 2 minutes." The room obeyed immediately. Even reporters lowered their screens. Rachel Brooks closed her folder and folded her hands. Cole loosened his collar. Mason wiped his palms on his pants. Derek stared at the bench, still empty, and felt for the first time since midnight the sensation he had given others for years. Uncertainty. He told himself it was nothing. A hearing. A lecture. Maybe a suspension. Then he noticed the nameplate fixed beneath the bench had been polished so brightly it caught the morning light. He squinted to read it clearly. Honorable Naomi Carter, Chief Judge. The blood drained from his face so quickly Mason noticed before he did. "Derek," Mason whispered, voice breaking, "who did we bring in last night?" No one answered. Because in that moment the side door behind the bench opened, and every person in the courtroom rose to their feet. The room remained standing, but no one seemed to breathe. From the side door behind the bench, Naomi Carter entered in a black judicial robe trimmed with simple silver piping, each step measured, each movement calm enough to feel louder than panic. Her hair, uneven from the night before, had been neatly covered beneath a fitted judicial cap. She did not hide what had happened. She simply refused to let it define the frame. Bailiff James Holt's voice carried across the courtroom, firm and clear. "All rise for the Honorable Naomi Carter, Chief Judge of the Richmond District Court." The title landed like thunder in a room that had forgotten the sky could answer back. Derek Vaughan shot to his feet so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Mason Reed stood half a second later, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Sergeant Cole Turner rose slowly, as if gravity itself had become heavier. Naomi reached the bench and looked over the courtroom with the same expression she had worn in the holding room. Calm. Unhurried. Entirely aware. She took her seat. "Be seated." Hundreds of small movements followed at once, wood creaking, papers rustling, shoes adjusting under benches. Yet the silence afterward was deeper than before. Naomi opened the docket folder in front of her. The leather was the same folder Derek had taken from her car. It now rested on polished oak beneath the court seal. "We are here this morning," she began, "for case 24-118, allegations of misconduct, unlawful detention, evidence tampering, procedural abuse, and related departmental failures involving several officers of the Richmond Police Department." Her voice was steady, resonant, impossible to interrupt. "Counsel, announce your appearances." Rachel Brooks stood first. "Rachel Brooks for the state, Your Honor." Defense counsel, a gray-haired attorney named Leonard Pike, rose more slowly than dignity preferred. "Leonard Pike for the respondents, Your Honor." He glanced at Derek with visible irritation, as if betrayal had become billable by the hour. Naomi nodded once. "Noted." Derek could not stop staring. Every sentence she spoke rewrote the night in his mind. The traffic stop. The folder. The clock. The warning. He remembered saying nobody important sat in holding chairs. Now he stood in a courtroom where everyone had risen for the woman he had tried to diminish. Naomi turned one page. "Before we proceed to scheduled testimony, the court must address emergency matters arising after midnight." A murmur moved through the gallery and died instantly when she looked up. "At approximately 2:05 this morning," she continued, "Chief Judge Naomi Carter was detained during transit to this courthouse." Derek's hands began to shake. Mason clasped his own wrists to hide it. Cole closed his eyes for one brief second. Naomi continued reading, not with anger, but precision sharpened by patience. Property was seized without warrant. Charges were discussed before facts were established. Recording equipment in a holding room ceased functioning during unauthorized contact. Every phrase struck harder because it was clean. No drama. Just facts lined up like witnesses. Leonard Pike rose. "Your Honor, with respect, perhaps another judge should hear. Sit down, Mr. Pike." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. He sat immediately. Naomi folded her hands. "This court has already arranged independent review at 6:30 this morning. State investigators are present. Additional judges have certified my authority to hear all emergency matters tied directly to court operations and officer conduct occurring on judicial premises or against judicial officers." Rachel Brooks did not smile, but satisfaction briefly reached her eyes. Naomi looked directly at Derek for the first time since taking the bench. He felt smaller under that gaze than he ever had in any uniform. "Officer Vaughn," she said, "you were certain last night that identity determines treatment." She paused just long enough for the whole room to feel the weight of memory. "Today, conduct will determine consequence." Then she lifted the gavel, struck once, and the sound echoed like a door finally opening. The first exhibit was silence. Not courtroom silence, but the kind that follows when people realize the story they trusted has already collapsed. Judge Naomi Carter nodded once toward the prosecution table. Rachel Brooks stood and approached the evidence monitor with a small remote in her hand. "The state moves to admit emergency exhibits A through H. Certified at 6:42 this morning." Leonard Pike rose halfway, then sat again when he understood objections would require facts he did not possess. Naomi reviewed the packet for 3 seconds. "Admitted." Brooks pressed the remote. Grainy hallway footage appeared on the screen. Timestamp, 2:26 a.m. The corridor outside holding room B. Derek Vaughn stood near the door, checking his phone. Mason Reed paced in and out of frame. Sergeant Cole Turner approached, paused, looked toward the disabled camera indicator, then walked away. The gallery leaned forward as one body. Brooks spoke without flourish. The internal camera in holding room B went offline at 3:11 a.m. What the officers did not know is that hallway cameras remained active. She clicked again. A second angle showed Derek carrying electric clippers into the room at 3:17 a.m. Mason followed with a plastic evidence bag containing Naomi's personal effects. Gasps moved through the benches and quickly died. Derek stared at the screen like it belonged to another life. Brooks changed slides. Complaint summaries filled the monitor. Dates. Case numbers. Civil settlements. Unresolved internal findings. Officer Vaughn has 17 prior complaints involving unlawful stops, intimidation, or misuse of authority, she said. 9 were closed without full review. Another click. Officer Reed has 6 associated incidents. Another. Sergeant Turner approved or supervised 12 of those responses. Cole lowered his head. Mason whispered, "This cannot be real." Derek said nothing. Naomi's face did not change. She had read every page months ago. Brooks continued. The state also calls Deputy Clerk Maria Ellis. A woman in her 60s took the stand, adjusted her glasses, and swore in. Ms. Ellis, Brooks asked, did Judge Carter have lawful reason to travel to the courthouse this morning? Yes, Maria said. She requested early access to review sealed filings in this very matter. Did you prepare those filings? I did. And were they in the folder taken from her vehicle? Maria looked directly at Derek. Yes. Brooks let the answer settle. Then she called a second witness, a maintenance technician named Aaron Bell. He testified that camera outages in holding room B required a manual switch behind a locked panel. Could it fail on its own? Brooks asked. Not likely, Bell said. Someone had to touch it. Leonard Pike stood at last. Your Honor, respondents request recess. Naomi folded her hands. Denied. Pike swallowed. Then we request private consultation. You have been consulting privately for years, Naomi replied. This court will proceed publicly. A low ripple of approval moved through the gallery before Bailiff Holt silenced it with a glance. Brooks approached the final exhibit. State Exhibit H. The screen showed a photograph taken that morning in chambers. Naomi's judicial cap rested beside a pair of trimmed locks carefully sealed in an evidence envelope. No commentary was needed. The image said what humiliation tries to hide. Derek's composure finally broke. This is personal, he blurted. She cannot hear this fairly. Naomi looked at him with the same calm she had offered all night. Officer Vaughn, fairness is not the absence of consequence. It is the presence of process. Then she turned to 2 state investigators standing near the rear wall. Investigators Harris and Monroe, based on admitted evidence and sworn testimony, this court orders immediate suspension of credentials pending criminal and administrative review for Officers Vaughn and Reed, and Sergeant Turner. The investigators stepped forward. No one resisted. Uniforms that had felt untouchable an hour earlier now looked like borrowed fabric. Mason trembled. Cole removed his badge and set it on counsel table himself. Derek held on to his until Investigator Harris quietly said, "It is over." When the badge finally touched the wood, the sound was small. But in that courtroom, it sounded like something much larger ending. By 10:07 a.m., the storm had passed, but the city would talk about the thunder for years. Courtroom 3 remained full even after the suspensions were entered into record. People stayed because they sensed something rare had happened there. Not punishment. Not spectacle. Accountability. The kind many had stopped expecting. Officer Derek Vaughn sat without his badge, hands clasped tightly, staring at the empty patch on his uniform where metal had once reflected authority. Mason Reed looked smaller than he had that morning, shoulders collapsed inward as if arrogance required structural support. Sergeant Cole Turner kept his eyes on the counsel table, where his own badge still rested beside a yellow legal pad filled with notes that no longer mattered. Judge Naomi Carter reviewed the final orders before her with measured calm. Administrative referrals. Preservation demands for all recordings. Notice to the Civilian Review Board. Mandatory reopening of prior complaints linked to the respondents. Every signature she placed on those documents was neat, controlled, and permanent. Rachel Brooks gathered exhibits with the efficient satisfaction of someone who knew systems only change when records do. Leonard Pike said little. He had spent a career defending institutions. Today he had watched one defend itself against those misusing it. Naomi looked toward the gallery. Faces of every kind stared back at her. Some hopeful. Some emotional. Some simply stunned that the room had not bent the usual direction. In the front row, retired Judge Samuel Whitaker nodded once, a quiet gesture of respect from one generation of the bench to another. Naomi then addressed the room. This court is not a shield for uniforms, titles, wealth, or status. It is a place where conduct meets consequence. Her voice carried to the far wall. If that principle fails, the building is only stone. No one moved. Even the reporters forgot to type for a moment. She turned to Derek. Officer Vaughn, you believed dignity could be taken when no one important was watching. Derek swallowed hard but said nothing. Naomi continued, not cruelly, not triumphantly, simply truthfully. Dignity does not depend on witnesses. It depends on character. Yours was seen clearly. She then looked to Mason. Mockery often sounds loudest in groups. Responsibility arrives one person at a time. Mason lowered his head. To Cole she said, leadership is not surviving misconduct. It is stopping it. Cole closed his eyes for one brief second, then nodded as though finally hearing something he should have known years earlier. Naomi lifted the sealed evidence envelope containing the cut locks of hair and handed it to the clerk. Mark this retained. Then she removed her judicial cap, revealing the uneven edges beneath. A soft murmur moved through the courtroom. She did not hide from their gaze. She stood taller in it. Some damage is visible, she said. Some is procedural. Both matter. Then she picked up the gavel for the final time that morning. These proceedings are concluded. The strike echoed once, clean and sharp. People slowly rose. Some to leave. Some because standing felt appropriate. Outside, the courthouse steps filled with cameras and questions. Naomi exited through the front doors alone, robe flowing lightly in the spring breeze. Reporters called her name. She paused only once. Your Honor, do you have a statement? A young journalist asked. Naomi looked across the street where sunlight touched the precinct building in the distance. Then she answered with a sentence the city would repeat for years. They thought power was the badge, she said. But power was the truth, arriving on time. She walked down the steps and into the bright morning as people parted without being asked. Behind her, officers entered under investigation, lawyers carried boxes of reopened files, and citizens who had nearly given up on fairness stood a little straighter. Because sometimes justice does not roar. Sometimes it waits through the night, keeps every receipt, and speaks when the whole room is finally forced to listen.